Marcus Thompson had always considered himself a dog person. Growing up in suburban Denver, his family had owned a succession of golden retrievers, each one more beloved than the last. At 28, working as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company, Marcus lived alone in a modest apartment complex called Riverside Gardens. The building was managed by a woman named Beverly Hutchinson, a stern-faced woman in her 50s who treated the property like her personal kingdom and the tenants like unwelcome guests. Beverly had made it clear from day one that pets were absolutely forbidden. She'd included multiple clauses in the lease agreement, posted signs throughout the building, and reminded tenants regularly during her monthly inspections. Marcus had signed the lease reluctantly, missing the companionship of a pet but needing an affordable place close to work. The trouble began on a rainy Thursday evening in late March. Marcus was returning from work, his backpack heavy with his laptop and the day's frustrations. The project he'd been leading had hit another snag, and his boss had made it clear that the deadline wasn't moving despite the technical challenges. As he climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, he heard something that made him pause. It was faint at first, almost lost in the sound of rain against the windows, a soft, desperate mewing that seemed to come from somewhere below. Marcus stopped, listening intently. There it was again, a plaintive cry that tugged at something deep in his chest. He'd heard that sound before, years ago, when his childhood cat had gotten trapped in the garage. Following the sound, Marcus made his way back downstairs and toward the building's basement. The basement was supposed to be off-limits to tenants, used only for storage and the building's mechanical systems. But the door was slightly ajar, and the mewing was definitely coming from inside. Marcus pushed the door open carefully, expecting Beverly to appear at any moment with her clipboard and disapproving frown. The basement was dimly lit, filled with old furniture, boxes, and the building's heating system. But there, in the far corner near the water heater, was a sight that made his heart skip. A small orange tabby cat was chained to a pipe, the chain barely long enough to let her lie down. She was painfully thin, her ribs visible through her matted fur. Near her was a small bowl of water and what looked like the remnants of some cheap dry food. But what made Marcus's blood run cold was the smell of gas in the air and the sound of a small leak somewhere in the mechanical system. The cat looked up at him with enormous green eyes, mewing pitifully. Marcus didn't hesitate. He approached slowly, speaking in soothing tones as he examined the chain. It was secured with a simple padlock, but the chain itself was old and had a weak link. Marcus found a wrench among some tools scattered nearby and managed to break the chain. The moment she was free, the cat didn't run. Instead, she rubbed against Marcus's leg, purring despite her obvious distress. He scooped her up, feeling how light she was, and quickly carried her upstairs to his apartment. Once inside, Marcus set the cat down and really looked at her. She was young, maybe a year old, and despite her condition, she was beautiful. Her orange fur had white markings on her chest and paws, and those green eyes held an intelligence that struck him immediately. She moved gingerly, clearly in pain, and Marcus noticed that one of her back legs seemed to be favoring the other. He opened a can of tuna from his kitchen, the only thing he could think of that might appeal to a hungry cat. She ate ravenously, confirming his suspicions about how long she'd been neglected. While she ate, Marcus called the nearest emergency veterinary clinic. Dr. Sarah Williams at the Pine Ridge Animal Hospital agreed to see them immediately. The examination revealed what Marcus had feared. The cat was severely underweight, dehydrated, and had an infection in her injured leg. Dr. Williams was gentle but thorough, and her expression grew increasingly concerned as she worked. "She's been neglected for weeks, maybe months," Dr. Williams said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The chain caused sores on her neck, and this leg injury is old. It's healed wrong because it was never treated. She'll always have a slight limp, but she should be fine otherwise." Marcus felt his jaw clench. Someone did this deliberately. "I'm afraid so. This isn't accidental neglect. Someone chained her up and left her there. Dr. Williams prescribed antibiotics and special food, then looked at Marcus seriously. Are you planning to keep her? Marcus looked down at the cat, who had curled up in his lap during the examination despite everything she'd been through. I don't know if I can. My lease doesn't allow pets. Well, she's going to need careful monitoring for the next few weeks. And honestly, after what she's been through, she needs stability and love more than anything. On the drive home, Marcus found himself talking to the cat, who sat quietly in the carrier but watched him intently. "What am I going to do with you?" he murmured. "Beverly will evict me if she finds out." But as he carried the cat back into his apartment, Marcus realized he'd already made his decision. He couldn't abandon her, not after what she'd been through. He'd figure out the housing situation later. He set up a comfortable bed for her in his bedroom, made sure she had food and water, and spent the evening just sitting with her. She seemed to understand that she was safe now, gradually relaxing and even purring softly when he petted her. It was while he was gently brushing her fur, trying to work out some of the mats, that Marcus discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden beneath the matted fur on her side was a small tattoo, the kind used to identify animals. But this wasn't a standard veterinary ID tattoo. This was crude, obviously done without proper equipment, and it read simply, BH1. Marcus stared at the tattoo, pieces of a horrible puzzle beginning to form in his mind. BH. Beverly Hutchinson, the building manager who was so adamant about no pets, who had access to every part of the building, including the basement. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work. He needed time to think, to plan, and to take care of his new companion. He decided to call her Ginger, both for her coloring and for the way she seemed to add spice to his previously routine life. While Ginger slept off the previous day's ordeal, Marcus did some research. He looked up animal cruelty laws in Colorado, tenant rights, and anything else that might be relevant. What he found made him realize that he was dealing with something much bigger than just a cruel landlord. That afternoon, there was a knock at his door. Marcus's heart hammered as he opened it to find Beverly Hutchinson standing in the hallway, her usual stern expression even more pronounced than usual. "Mr. Thompson," she said without preamble, "I need to conduct a routine inspection of your apartment." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. Ginger was asleep in the bedroom, and while she was quiet, there was no guarantee she'd stay that way. "Is this one of the scheduled monthly inspections?" Marcus asked, blocking the doorway slightly. Beverly's eyes narrowed. "As the property manager, I have the right to inspect any unit with proper notice, which I'm giving you now. Please step aside." Marcus knew his rights as a tenant, and this wasn't proper notice, but he also knew that refusing entry would only raise more suspicions. "Of course," he said, stepping back. "Though I should mention that I'm not feeling well today. That's why I called in sick." Beverly brushed past him, her eyes scanning the apartment with the intensity of a detective searching for evidence. She moved through the living room and kitchen methodically, opening cabinets and checking corners with a thoroughness that went far beyond a normal inspection. "What exactly are you looking for?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Just making sure everything is in order," Beverly replied curtly. She was heading toward the bedroom now, and Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. That's when Ginger, as if sensing the danger, let out a soft mew from behind the bedroom door. Beverly froze, her head snapping toward the sound. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "what was that sound?" Marcus's mind raced, but before he could formulate an answer, Ginger mewed again, louder this time. Beverly pushed past him and opened the bedroom door. The orange tabby was sitting on Marcus's bed, looking up at Beverly with those intelligent green eyes. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of Marcus's heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then Beverly's expression changed from triumph to something else entirely, something that looked almost like fear. "Where did you find her?" Beverly asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus studied her face, seeing guilt and panic warring with her usual authoritarianism. "In the basement," he said simply, "chained to a pipe, half-starved with a gas leak nearby." Beverly's face went white. "You had no right to go down there. That area is off-limits to tenants." "And you had no right to chain a cat up and leave her to die," Marcus shot back, his anger finally breaking through his careful control. Beverly straightened, trying to regain her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about, and it doesn't matter anyway. You're in violation of your lease. You have 24 hours to remove that animal or face immediate eviction." She turned to leave, but Marcus's voice stopped her. "BH-1," he said quietly. Beverly spun around, her face now completely drained of color. "That's what's tattooed on her side," Marcus continued. "Beverly Hutchinson, number 1. How many others are there, Beverly?" The property manager stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, she managed to speak. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me." Beverly glanced around nervously as if checking for listening devices. "Not here, not now, just get rid of the cat, and don't mention this to anyone." "Or what?" "Or you'll find out that I have a lot more power in this building than you realize," Beverly said, her voice regaining some of its usual steel. 24 hours, Mr. Thompson." After she left, Marcus sat on his bed next to Ginger, his mind reeling. The cat seemed to sense his distress and climbed into his lap, purring softly. Marcus stroked her fur gently, being careful of her injuries. "What has she been doing to you?" he murmured. "And how many others are there?" As if in answer to his question, Ginger mewed softly and looked toward the window. Marcus followed her gaze and saw something that made his heart sink. In the apartment building across the street, visible through a window, was what looked like another cat. This one appeared to be black and white, and it was sitting completely still in what looked like a small cage. Marcus grabbed his binoculars, a remnant from a brief birdwatching phase, and focused on the window. What he saw made his stomach turn. The cat was indeed in a cage, barely large enough for it to stand up. And there, visible on a small tag attached to the cage, was what looked like BH2. He spent the rest of the afternoon surveying the neighborhood through his binoculars, and what he found painted a picture of systematic cruelty that went far beyond what he'd initially imagined. In various buildings and houses within a few blocks, he spotted at least 3 more cats in similar conditions. All appeared to be in cramped spaces, all looked underfed, and all had the same vacant, hopeless expression he'd seen in Ginger's eyes before he'd rescued her. That evening, as Marcus sat with Ginger and tried to figure out his next move, he realized that he wasn't just dealing with a cruel landlord anymore. He was looking at what appeared to be an organized operation, and Beverly Hutchinson was at the center of it. The question was, what was he going to do about it? He had less than 24 hours to decide, and whatever choice he made would determine not just his own future, but the fate of at least 4 other cats who were still trapped in Beverly's twisted system. Marcus barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those other cats trapped in their various prisons throughout the neighborhood. Ginger seemed to sense his restlessness, staying close to him and occasionally placing a paw on his arm as if offering comfort. By dawn, he had made his decision. He couldn't just save one cat and ignore the others, but he also couldn't risk a direct confrontation with Beverly until he understood the full scope of what he was dealing with. Marcus needed allies, information, and a plan that would protect all the animals involved. His first call was to Dr. Williams at the animal hospital. When he explained what he'd discovered, her response was immediate and fierce. "This is exactly the kind of thing we see too often," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Animal hoarding operations disguised as something else, but this sounds more organized than most. You said she's marking them with numbers. That's what it looks like. I've spotted at least 4 others in the neighborhood, all in various states of confinement. Marcus, this is dangerous. If she's running some kind of operation, confronting her directly could put those animals at even greater risk. We need to involve the authorities. Dr. Williams connected him with Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who worked with the county's Animal Cruelty Investigation Unit. Detective Rodriguez listened to Marcus's story with growing concern. The problem is, we need evidence, she explained. Photos, documentation, witness statements, and we need to be careful not to tip her off before we can secure the welfare of all the animals involved. What can I do? Keep documenting everything, but don't do anything that could be construed as breaking and entering or harassment. We need this to be airtight when we move. After ending the call, Marcus looked at Ginger, who was sitting in a patch of sunlight by the window. She looked so much healthier already, just after one day of proper food and care. It broke his heart to think of the others still suffering. The deadline Beverly had given him was approaching fast. Marcus knew he needed to appear to comply while actually gathering the evidence needed to expose her operation. He had an idea, but it would require some careful maneuvering. That afternoon, he knocked on Beverly's apartment door, which was on the ground floor of the building. She answered quickly, as if she'd been expecting him. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I trust you've resolved the pet situation." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Marcus said, trying to project defeated resignation. "I've gotten attached to the cat, and I was wondering if there might be some way to work out an arrangement." Beverly's eyes narrowed. "The lease is very clear about pets." "I understand that, but I was thinking, maybe there's some kind of pet deposit or additional fee that could make this work. I'm willing to pay extra." For a moment, Beverly seemed to consider this. Marcus could see her calculating something behind her cold eyes. "Come in," she said finally, stepping aside. Beverly's apartment was immaculate and sterile, with no personal touches visible. Everything was beige and brown, and the only decoration was a series of certificates on the wall related to property management. But what caught Marcus's attention was a small notebook on the coffee table, open to a page filled with what looked like a list of addresses and numbers. "Sit down," Beverly said, gesturing to a chair that faced away from the notebook. She quickly closed it and moved it to a drawer. "Let me be clear about something, Mr. Thompson. I don't normally make exceptions to the pet policy." "I understand, but this is a special situation." "Yes, it is." Beverly sat across from him, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, how much do you know about animal care?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "I grew up with pets. I think I can handle the responsibility." "Responsibility is more than just feeding and watering," Beverly said, her voice taking on an odd tone. "Animals need structure, discipline. They need to understand their place." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "I believe in treating animals with kindness and respect." Beverly's laugh was cold. "Kindness, respect. Those are human concepts, Mr. Thompson. Animals understand hierarchy and control, nothing else." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood. "You see, I've been conducting a kind of experiment, testing different approaches to animal management. The cat you found was part of that research." Marcus forced himself to remain calm, though every instinct was screaming at him to run. "What kind of research?" "Behavioral modification, stress response, adaptation to confined environments." Beverly turned back to him, her expression now openly cruel. That particular subject was proving resistant to the conditioning process. Perhaps spending time in the basement would have eventually broken that resistance. The casual way she spoke about torture made Marcus's stomach turn. But he needed to keep her talking, to gather information that could help the other cats. "You said she was subject number 1. Are there others? Beverly smiled, and it was one of the most unsettling expressions Marcus had ever seen. Oh yes. 5 subjects total, each in a different phase of the experiment. Some are responding better than others. Where are they being kept? Various locations. I have arrangements with several property owners in the area. We're all interested in understanding animal behavior under different conditions. Marcus realized he was looking at something far worse than simple animal cruelty. This was organized, systematic torture disguised as research, and there were other people involved. I could help, he heard himself saying, though the words made him feel sick. With the research, I mean. I have a background in data analysis. Beverly studied him carefully. That's an interesting offer, but I'd need to be sure you understand the importance of discretion and commitment. Of course. The current subjects have been in the program for varying lengths of time. Subject 2 has been the most successful, complete behavioral compliance after 8 months of conditioning. Subject 3 is still showing signs of resistance, but we're making progress. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, but he forced his expression to remain interested and engaged. What kind of conditioning techniques do you use? Controlled feeding schedules, environmental stress, social isolation, and periodic reinforcement through temporary comfort followed by renewed restriction. Beverly was speaking like she was discussing the weather. The key is consistency and patience. And if they don't respond to the conditioning? Beverly's smile turned predatory. Then they're terminated and replaced with new subjects. We've had a few failures along the way. The casual mention of killing cats who didn't respond to torture was too much. Marcus stood abruptly, afraid that if he stayed any longer, he might do something that would compromise the investigation. This is all very interesting, he managed to say, but I should get back to check on my cat. Your cat, Beverly repeated slowly. Yes, subject 1 seems to have bonded with you. That's actually quite useful data. How so? We've never observed one of the subjects forming an attachment after extended conditioning. It suggests either a flaw in our methodology or an unusual resilience in that particular animal. Marcus headed for the door, desperate to get away from Beverly's clinical discussion of torture, but her voice stopped him as he reached for the handle. Mr. Thompson, I think we could work something out regarding your pet situation, but I'll need to see how subject 1 responds to some additional conditioning first. What do you mean? Bring her to the basement tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. We'll run some behavioral tests, and if she performs satisfactorily, I'll consider allowing you to keep her. Marcus's blood ran cold. She wanted to get Ginger back into her control, probably to continue the torture or worse. I don't think that's necessary. Oh, but I do. Beverly's voice hardened. You see, Mr. Thompson, you've stumbled into something much bigger than a simple lease violation. And now that you know about our research, you're either going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. The threat was clear. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already working on how to turn this situation to his advantage. 7 o'clock tomorrow, he said. Don't be late. And Mr. Thompson, don't do anything foolish. You wouldn't want something to happen to subject 1 because of poor decision-making on your part. Marcus left Beverly's apartment feeling like he needed a shower. But he also had what he needed: a confession, details about the other cats, and evidence of a larger conspiracy. He immediately called Detective Rodriguez and Dr. Williams, and by evening they had assembled a team that included animal control officers, police detectives, and volunteers from local animal rescue organizations. The plan was risky but necessary. Marcus would keep his appointment with Beverly in the basement, but he wouldn't be alone. While he was gathering final evidence and keeping Beverly occupied, the rescue team would be moving to secure the other cats based on the locations Marcus had identified. That night, as Marcus sat with Ginger, he tried to prepare himself for what was coming. The little cat seemed to sense something was wrong, staying close to him and occasionally touching his hand with her paw. "Tomorrow we're going to help your friends," he told her softly. "But first, we have to go back to that basement. I promise I won't let anything happen to you." Ginger purred and curled up in his lap, trusting him completely. Marcus just hoped he was worthy of that trust. The next evening arrived with an early spring thunderstorm, the kind that made the old building creak and groan. Marcus carried Ginger down to the basement at exactly 7 o'clock, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. Hidden in his jacket was a small recording device that Detective Rodriguez had provided. Beverly was waiting for him in the basement, along with two other people Marcus didn't recognize. One was a thin man with nervous eyes, and the other was a heavy-set woman who looked at Ginger with the same clinical detachment Beverly had shown. "Right on time," Beverly said approvingly. "Let me introduce you to my colleagues. This is Dr. Frank Morrison and Dr. Janet Pierce. They've been instrumental in developing our research protocols." Marcus realized he was looking at the other property owners Beverly had mentioned, the ones who were keeping the other cats. His recording device was capturing every word. "Now then," Beverly continued, "let's see how Subject 1 responds to returning to her conditioning environment." She gestured to a corner of the basement where Marcus could see that chains and restraints had been set up, along with what looked like a small cage barely large enough for a cat to lie down. "The test is simple," Dr. Morrison said, his voice clinical and cold. "We'll observe how quickly she submits to restraint and whether her time with you has compromised her conditioning." Marcus felt Ginger tense in his arms. She had recognized the basement, and her body language showed fear and stress. "And if she doesn't respond the way you want?" Marcus asked. Dr. Pierce smiled coldly. "Then we'll have to restart her conditioning from the beginning, more intensive this time." That was when Marcus heard the most beautiful sound he could have imagined, the sound of multiple sets of footsteps on the basement stairs. "This is the police. Nobody move." The basement suddenly filled with law enforcement officers, animal control personnel, and rescue volunteers. Beverly and her colleagues were too shocked to resist as they were handcuffed and read their rights. Detective Rodriguez approached Marcus, who was still holding Ginger protectively. "We got them all," she said with satisfaction. 5 cats total, all in various stages of malnutrition and abuse. They're being transported to the animal hospital for evaluation and treatment. As Beverly was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at Marcus with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," she snarled. "Those animals will never be normal. They're damaged goods." Marcus looked down at Ginger, who was purring softly in his arms despite the chaos around them. "She's not damaged," he said firmly. "She's a survivor." The aftermath of the raid was swift and comprehensive. Within hours, the story of Beverly Hutchinson's animal cruelty operation was making headlines across Denver. The local news stations picked up the story, and by the next morning, Marcus found himself fielding calls from reporters wanting to interview the hero tenant who had exposed the abuse. But Marcus's attention was focused elsewhere. At Pine Ridge Animal Hospital, Dr. Williams and her team were working around the clock to assess and treat the 5 rescued cats. Marcus had brought Ginger in for a follow-up examination, and what he learned about the other cats made his heart ache. Subject 2, as Beverly had called her, was a beautiful black and white tuxedo cat who had been kept in a cage barely large enough for her to stand up. After 8 months of Beverly's conditioning, she was completely withdrawn, refusing to make eye contact with humans and flinching at any sudden movement. Subject 3 was a gray tabby who had been kept in a basement similar to where Marcus had found Ginger. His spirit wasn't completely broken yet, but he showed signs of severe anxiety and malnutrition. Subject 4 was a small tortoiseshell cat who had been kept in what could only be described as a closet-sized room with no windows. She was the most physically damaged, with infected wounds from restraints and clear signs of neurological issues from prolonged stress. Subject 5 was a young black cat, probably not even a year old, who had been Beverly's most recent acquisition. He still had some fight in him, but Dr. Williams warned that a few more months of the treatment the others had endured would have broken him completely. As Marcus watched Dr. Williams examine each cat, he felt a growing sense of responsibility. Ginger had been lucky. She'd been rescued before the worst of the psychological damage could set in. But these other cats would need extensive rehabilitation, medical care, and patient, loving homes. The good news is that cats are remarkably resilient, Dr. Williams explained as she finished her examinations. With proper care, most of them can recover both physically and emotionally, but it's going to take time and they'll need specialized attention. What happens to them now? Normally, they'd go to the county shelter system, but given the level of trauma they've experienced, they really need individualized care in a quiet, stable environment. Marcus looked through the window of the recovery room where all 5 cats were resting in separate enclosures. Ginger had been placed near the others, and Marcus noticed that she seemed to be watching them, as if she recognized fellow survivors. "How much would it cost to provide that kind of care?" Marcus asked. Dr. Williams gave him a knowing look. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "Maybe. I've got a stable job, savings, and a lease that's about to become available since my landlord is going to prison. I could probably handle the medical expenses, but I'd need help with everything else." "The rescue community is pretty amazing when it comes to cases like this," Dr. Williams said. "Let me make some calls." Over the next few days, as Beverly and her associates awaited their court hearings, an incredible network of support began to form around the rescued cats. The local animal rescue organizations had been outraged by the cruelty case, and volunteers stepped forward to help with rehabilitation, foster care, and long-term placement. But Marcus found himself reluctant to let the cats be placed in separate homes. They had been through trauma together, and he'd observed how they seemed to comfort each other in their recovery room. Ginger, in particular, had appointed herself as a sort of therapy cat for the others, often sitting near the most distressed cats and purring softly. The decision was made easier when Marcus received a call from his property management company, informing him that Beverly's arrest had voided his lease, and that he could move immediately without penalty. They also mentioned that there was a house available for rent just outside the city, a 3-bedroom place with a large yard, owned by someone who specifically welcomed pet owners. The house turned out to be perfect. It was owned by Alina Chen, a retired veterinarian who had heard about the rescue case and wanted to help. The rent was reasonable, the property was peaceful, and Alina made it clear that she would be thrilled to have the cats living there. "I've been looking for the right tenant for months," Alina explained as she showed Marcus around the property. "When I heard about what you did for those cats, I knew you were the person I wanted living here." The house had everything Marcus could have hoped for. Plenty of space for the cats to roam safely, multiple quiet rooms where they could retreat if they felt overwhelmed, and a large screened porch where they could experience the outdoors without danger. Moving day was carefully orchestrated with help from Dr. Williams and several volunteers from the local rescue organization. Each cat was transported separately to minimize stress, and the house had been prepared with individual safe spaces where each could decompress. Ginger adapted quickly, as Marcus had expected. Within hours, she was exploring the house and had claimed a sunny spot by the living room window as her own. But the other cats needed more time and patience. The black and white cat, whom Marcus had started calling Domino, spent the first 3 days hiding under the bed in the master bedroom. She would only eat when no humans were around, and any attempt to approach her sent her into a panic. The gray tabby, now named Storm for his coloring and his temperamental nature, was slightly more social but showed signs of severe anxiety. He would follow Marcus around the house at a distance, but would bolt if Marcus made any sudden movements. The tortoiseshell, whom Marcus called Patches, was the most physically damaged and required daily medication for her infections. She tolerated necessary handling but showed no interest in affection or play. The young black cat, now named Midnight, was the most promising of the new arrivals. He still had curiosity and playfulness, though he was easily startled and would sometimes have what appeared to be panic attacks triggered by unknown stimuli. The first few weeks were challenging. Marcus found himself learning about feline psychology, trauma recovery, and specialized care techniques. Dr. Williams provided ongoing support, and Alina Chen proved to be an invaluable resource, often stopping by to check on the cat's progress. But it was Ginger who proved to be the most important factor in the other cat's recovery. She seemed to understand what they had been through in a way that no human could. Marcus would often find her sitting quietly near whichever cat was having the hardest day, not intruding but simply being present. The breakthrough came about a month after they'd all moved into the house. Marcus was working from home, his laptop open on the kitchen table, when he noticed that Domino had ventured out of the bedroom and was sitting in the doorway watching him. When he looked up, instead of running away, she simply sat down and began grooming herself. It was a small thing, but Marcus recognized it as a significant step. For the first time since her rescue, Domino was relaxed enough in the presence of a human to engage in normal cat behavior. Over the following weeks, each cat began to show signs of progress. Storm started sleeping in the living room instead of hiding. Patches began purring when Marcus administered her medication. Midnight discovered the joy of toy mice and would sometimes play for minutes at a time. But the real test came when Marcus's mother, Patricia Thompson, announced that she was coming for a visit. Marcus had told his family about the cats, but he'd been vague about the details. His mother, who lived in Phoenix, had been supportive but clearly concerned about her son's sudden transition from pet-free bachelor to caretaker of 5 traumatized cats. "Are you sure you know what you're gotten yourself into?" she asked during one of their weekly phone calls. 5 cats is a lot of responsibility, especially if they have special needs. "I'm sure, Mom, they're good cats. They just need time and patience." "Well, I'm looking forward to meeting them. I hope they're friendly." Marcus felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. His mother was a lovely woman, but she was also energetic and talkative, and she had a tendency to want a pet and interact with every animal she met. That kind of approach would likely terrify most of his cats. As her visit approached, Marcus found himself preparing his mother as much as he was preparing the cats. "Mom, I need you to understand that these cats are different from the pets we had when I was growing up," he explained during a pre-visit phone call. "They've been through trauma, and they're still recovering. Some of them might hide the whole time you're here, and that's okay." "Of course, dear, I understand completely." But Marcus knew his mother, and he suspected that her version of understanding and the reality of dealing with traumatized animals might be very different things. The night before her arrival, Marcus sat in his living room with all 5 cats visible for the first time since they'd moved in. Ginger was in her usual spot by the window. Storm was sleeping on the couch, though he still maintained a careful distance from Marcus. Domino was lying on the cat tree, her first time venturing onto the main floor during the evening. Patches was grooming herself on a cushion near the bookshelf. And Midnight was actually playing with a feather toy, though he stopped frequently to check for potential threats. Looking at them all together, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. They had all come so far from the broken, terrified animals they'd been just a few months ago. But he also knew that they still had a long way to go, and introducing his well-meaning but potentially overwhelming mother into their carefully balanced environment was going to be a significant test. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting," he told Ginger, who looked up at him with those intelligent green eyes and purred as if she understood exactly what he was worried about. As if responding to his words, the other cats all seemed to focus on him for a moment, and Marcus had the strange sensation that they were all in this together, a little family that had formed out of shared trauma and mutual rescue. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them as a team. Patricia Thompson arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in late May, her rental car loaded with enough luggage for a week-long stay despite having planned only a 3-day visit. Marcus watched from the window as she parked, noting how she immediately began talking to Ginger, who had positioned herself on the windowsill to observe the newcomer. "Well, aren't you beautiful?" he heard his mother saying through the glass as she gathered her things. "I can't wait to meet you properly." Marcus took a deep breath and opened the front door. His mother was exactly as he remembered, energetic, warm, and completely incapable of containing her enthusiasm. She immediately tried to rush past him to get to the cats, but Marcus gently caught her arm. "Mom, remember what we talked about, slow and steady." Patricia Thompson was a retired elementary school teacher who had spent 30 years winning over shy children, and she approached the cat situation with the same confident energy she'd once used in her classroom. Unfortunately, traumatized cats and nervous 6-year-olds required very different approaches. "Oh, Marcus, they're wonderful," she exclaimed, spotting Storm on the couch and immediately moving toward him.